2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're going to rock around the clock tonight. Hey, glad John, join me.
Today, I have two very special guests to speak to about their upcoming book, 50 Years of Happy Days. Um, they were supervising producers on the show as well as writers, Brian Levant and Fred Fox. The book is fantastic. How did it come about for the two of you to do the first book devoted to Happy Days exclusively?
Fred, take it.
Um, Brian and I were talking, and we realized Happy Days has been mentioned in many, many books, but there'd never been a single book on Happy Days. So Brian came up with an excellent idea. He said, "Hey, Fred, let's do it and take it from there, Brian."
We did a 118-page proposal, basically a slimmed down version of the book. And we received offers from 3 publishers, and we made a deal with Insight Editions, who does a lot of pop culture and collectible work, and and then Paramount didn't want to give us the rights. They had never granted the rights to anyone, and I don't know why. I think they were sensitive about it. There were a lot of issues with drugs on other shows. And even though Erin Moran, when she was older, did have some difficulties navigating the adult child star world, Happy Days was an island of sanity, of collective a work ethic that embodied an ensemble concept to the nth degree, and that everybody was equal, and it turned out to be a very interesting story. Fred was on staff, began on Laverne and Shirley, which I'm sure he'll tell you about, and the 4th season joined the show on staff. I wrote my first episode for the 4th season and joined the staff on the 5th season. So there's this whole period of the show. We knew this. We knew the show, the episodes. We'd seen them a million times. They were running on daytime at the time as well. They went into daytime syndication nationally from ABC, and when they had like 36 shows. So if you weren't on the show, you got to know them real well. But the entire cast, surviving cast, Tom Bosley has left us, Aaron has left us, Al Molinaro, Pat Morita, are gone. But the entire surviving cast and producers were so helpful and so supportive of this effort, and they all sat for extensive interviews. They donated personal photos, and it's just been great for Fred and I to work on Happy Days again after 40 years.
Brought back so many cherished memories. And Brian and I have worked very well together on a lot of different shows, so it was fun to get back.
Yes, no, we really hadn't collaborated on anything except our attempt to revive the show we created, My Secret Identity.
That was a good show. I watched that as a kid.
Yeah, very good.
Probably makes me sound old.
Fred went to Toronto and took the helm of that and brought home the International Emmy for Best Children and Young People's series that you can see behind his head there.
It was presented by Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, so get back to you. So the first 3 seasons, we didn't know the stories behind them except about the end of the 2nd season, when Happy Days had plummeted in the ratings against Good Times and was facing cancellation. And Gary Marshall, to save The Odd Couple, several years before, had transitioned from a single camera show to a 3-camera audience show, which returned The Odd Couple to its theatrical roots, and they succeeded in doing that, and they ran for 5 years. Gary tried the same trick except for one big difference. They put Fonzie in the center of the show. I mean, if you look at the first, how long is it, Fred, before Henry even utters a line?
It's like 2 minutes before the show ended.
Yeah.
But his growing popularity, uh, uh, Fred Silverman, who had become the head of ABC, said, put him in the driver's seat. And they shifted from the final episode of the year from a single camera show, which was a great show. I mean, there are people in the cast of Happy Days who honestly believe the first season is the absolute pinnacle of the series. And they put everybody in front of an audience, and it unleashed a tsunami of energy that these people grabbed this opportunity and they just ran with it like you can't believe. If you look at that first 3-camera show at the end of season 2, which was rewarded with a pickup for only 13. But when they came back the following season, they were on fire. These people were just, and a lot of it comes from Gary Marshall, Jerry Paris, Gary the creator, who we dedicate the book to, and Jerry, who directed all but like 12 episodes out of 255. You know, they saw what was happening, and with their training on the Dick Van Dyke Show and The Odd Couple, they were able to take that and channel it and turn the show into something more than a weekly series.
Yeah, we can still feel the energy, actually.
Well,
Yeah.
that was one of my favorite parts reading the copy of the book, is the whole season 3 transition. And I did not realize that almost everybody in the cast had done theater before, live on stage, aside from Ron Howard, who it's interesting that you talk about how he got used to that, and moving from the Andy Griffith Show, which was huge, to the Smith Family, which wasn't so huge, and then to Happy Days. It's a fascinating book.
Thank you. Ron's story is really unique because he was an actor. What was he like? One day on the set, he was opening his mail, and he qualified for his 20-year SAG pension. I think he was 24 or 25.
But he continued to act for.
But when he left the film, rather the Smith Family, he was intent on becoming a director. He applied to and was accepted at USC's film school. And really the only reason he did the original 1971 pilot, people don't realize that Happy Days actually began as a 1971 pilot that didn't sell, starring Ron Howard, starring Marion Ross, starring Anson Williams, with other people playing Howard and Joni Cunningham. And then there was, of course, Chuck Cunningham. There was no Fonzie. But and Paramount played that off, the pilot off, as a segment in the final season of Love American Style. But that is what casting director Fred Roos, who was partners with Gary Marshall and Compass Management, showed to George Lucas to get George Lucas interested in casting Ron for American Graffiti.
And it's all come full circle because Ron directed a Star Wars movie.
Remember, he did, but before that, he did Willow for Lucas.
Yeah,
and which he said to me at the time was such an amazing learning experience for him, in epic storytelling. And it was just one of those things that here was Ron, who wanted to be a filmmaker, who also wanted not to join the army. Yeah, he had a very low draft number, and that's kind of why he did the original pilot. And then by the time that ended the selective service, it ended, and it became a volunteer army. And Ron was taking classes at USC, and Happy Days came back. They shot the pilot in November of '73, right, and it aired for the first time January 15th, 1974, 50 years ago, almost 60 now. But the book world is slow. You know, we wanted this out. We just got the books on,
Nice.
on January 15th. Well,
Wow.
it's coming out on election day, but you can pre-order it anywhere.
Speaking of books, Brian, I know you wrote the book My Life in Toys, and there are
Yes.
a lot of collectibles seen as imagery in this book. Are they from your personal collection?
There's a few from the outtakes from My Life in Toys are included there, but the majority is from the Happy Days Museum in Cordango, Italy, that is curated and by the founder of the Happy Days International Fans Club, Giuseppe Ganelli. Why don't you tell Fred? Why don't you tell us the story of this guy?
Gentleman, got years ago, he just became enamored with Happy Days, and as Brian said, started the Happy Days International Fan Club. And gosh, we met him, God,
Over 20 years ago.
over 20 years ago. He just has this passion for Happy Days. And when Brian and I were doing the book, we thought it would be a great treasure to look through his. In fact, he's in the Guinness Book of Records for having the most Happy Days memorabilia. I think what 15,000.
15,000 pieces that he has. He's a radiologist, and he has become so close with the cast, with the Marshall family, that at the Bronze the Fonz event in Milwaukee some years back, which was attended by the entire cast and Gary and Penny Marshall, Fred and I weren't there, but he was.
No, you had mentioned Paramount was a little hesitant at first to sign off on this. Did this eventually become officially licensed, and is that why we have so many great stills?
Yes, it is officially licensed. We got on a call finally with the woman who was in charge and who was there in the Happy Days era.
Oh, wow.
And she responded to our affection for the series, and the fact that we wanted to tell a very honest story, but there was some censorship involved by Paramount at some levels, which was unfortunate. But we tried to tell as factual a representation of the entire history of the show. As I said, we didn't know about the casting. I mean, what really was amazing is that all of them, they remember every detail of their readings of being cast. I mean, what people were wearing,
Excuse me.
And because, you do tend to remember and hang on to the things that are the most pivotal memories of your life. And, to hear Anson Williams tell the story about how his car, his junk car, he's going to open mic nights around town singing. He's living with 6 guys in a 2-bedroom apartment. He finally gets a call for a pilot, and his car breaks down in a rainstorm.
He shows up sopping wet.
He shows up 4 hours late. That everybody else is gone. The casting of Mildred Gussie, who ran Paramount, with a cigarette in her mouth, and he hears, "He's lucky we haven't cast a Patsy yet."
Well, and Brian, there's a great story when he finally, he did a great audition, met with Gary Marshall, and it's going well. And then just before kind of the end, Gary goes to Anson, "Hey, do you play baseball?" And Nancy goes, "Yeah." And Gary goes, "Are you good?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm good." And we think that was the clincher.
Yeah, because it's funny. I just reread. I wasn't looking for it. I just happened to see it. The New York Times interview for the 50th anniversary, and I think it was Marion who said that Gary turned us into a team by turning us into a team. Meaning the Happy Days softball team, which Fred and I were eventually the managers of this organization.
And players, fortunately.
Yeah, and so there was Happy Days. These were solid, competitive people. And Gary Marshall was looking for people who had multiple talents. He really was. He didn't want to have, for instance, a writing staff of 7 Woody Allens. He wanted people who were musicians, who were athletes, who were performers, who brought something more to the table. And sports were very, very important to him. And to build cohesion, he started the team in the entertainment league, playing a game on Sundays. And Fred can tell you that there was one problem, that one member of the team, a very prominent one, had never owned a mitt or played the game.
Yeah. Henry, growing up, never played baseball. I think, archery and stuff. So when
water skiing,
and water skiing, yes, which we'll probably talk about later. So Ron Howard gave him his very first glove, and Walter Vaughn, right, pitched in, who was our dialogue coach, and it was interesting when Ron started playing. I remember one of the first games we played with him. I was playing shortstop or something, and there's a ball hit that Willie Mays could have gotten to. And Henry said, "Hey, Fred, why didn't anyone get that?" But then he turned into a very knowledgeable, and not only a knowledgeable player, he became a fearsome pitcher. I mean, it was an incredible journey.
So the team evolved from playing, ragtag games in there, and everybody bringing their own T-shirts and stuff. And all of a sudden you see the pictures. All of a sudden now we got uniforms. And then what year? The 4th season, I guess.
Right.
Steve Brenner, an executive with the Dodgers, heard that we had a team and invited the team to play before a Dodgers game.
Oh, wow.
And this set the stage for the team, which included Tom Bosley, Marion Ross, Aaron Moran, Al Molinaro, Donnie Most in center, Ron Howard in left, Anson,
Scott Baio,
Anson at second base, Henry on the mound, Gary Marshall at first base,
Ted McGinley.
Yes. So when you start adding Scott Baio, who was an all Brooklyn little leaguer,
Yeah.
Ted McGinley, who was the captain of the USC water polo team, and Harris Kell, who played Bobby in the show, who I went to high school with my brother and owned the Big Ten base stealing record. Our sound editor played AAA ball. Chip Swanson played AAA ball with the Denver Bears. All of a sudden, you got a fearsome lineup and people who were competitive. Very competitive. I mean, Henry says in the book, when we were on the road, I was out for blood.
Well, once the show became a hit, was it hard to keep these games private? Or did fans
here's what happened. We ended up playing 16 or 17 games in major league parks. Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Anaheim, San Diego, Chicago, Milwaukee, Philadelphia,
Portland.
New York, minor league games, charity games in New Orleans, in Albuquerque,
Miami.
And in Miami, we got rained out playing the Dolphins. Thank God, they're killing us.
Well, you all ended up playing another game for one of the reunion specials, didn't you?
Right.
Yes. Fred produced and wrote the 30th anniversary that Henry produced, and part of it was a softball game.
That was an incredible special. I loved that both Chucks showed up.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a nice tribute to them.
So, we talk about, all the love for Happy Days. Can you talk about how the other shows in the franchise get good spotlights as well, like Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, the cartoons, Joni Loves Chachi?
Yes, no, Happy Days gave out spin-offs like Halloween candy. The first, of course, was Laverne and Shirley, and Fred was part of that very first season. So we talk in detail about the episode, a date with Fonzie, where Richie's on a losing streak, and Fonzie finally sets him up with a girl who doesn't know the meaning of the word no, and so, oops, I'm going to disconnect my phone here that I failed to do, but
Yeah, back then they actually did Vodio Doe.
Very good.
no, no, you Bodio once is what she said. So the episode was startlingly good, and Lowell Gann said that Jerry Paris imbued the show with a kind of energy that you did not see on television at that time. And 2 weeks later, they brought the girls back, and with the Cunningham kitchen sitting in for their apartment, they come home from the date with Richie and Fonzie, which went very badly for Richie. And they did a scene where they talked about the differences between them. That, Shirley's an eternal optimist and Laverne is a realist, but together, that they need each other to get through it. And from that, they sold the pilot, and then Cindy Williams didn't want to do it. Now, Fred, tell us. I mean, Fred went to high school with Cindy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was New Year's Eve, 1975. The phone rang, and it was Cindy, and she said, "Fred, I'm doing the show called Laverne and Shirley. Yeah, I don't know, it could be canceled, who knows? But if you want to be my assistant, when I leave for the day, you can go to the writer's room. Would you like, I can get you a meeting with Gary Marshall."
Oh,
So
wow.
I was working for a small advertising agency at the time. So I was thrilled. So I walk into Gary's office, and he goes, "So you're Freddie Fox's kid." And when Gary and Jerry Belson came out from New York to be writers, one of the first shows they were on was the Joey Bishop show, and Dad was on staff. And Gary was just very nice and said how great Dad was and very helpful because they were new. And then Gary said, "Now, Fred, I know you want to write." And I almost went, "Really?" Because at the time, even though Dad was an incredible, successful writer growing up, I thought it was so cool, but just never entered my mind. So, God, I was so
I still
lucky.
can't believe that. I mean, his father wrote for decades for Bob Hope and George Burns.
Well, and Brian was,
And it never crossed his mind to go into show business.
yeah, I don't know if we could only go back in time, but I was so lucky. So when Cindy left the set, I'd go to the writer's room, and Gary was very, very interesting because you hear horror stories of new writers in writer's room. Like, the new writer might pitch a joke, and people say, "That's not funny. You're an idiot." But when I started, if I wanted to pitch a joke, I'd write it down, hand it to a real writer, and they would pitch it. If it bombed, they wouldn't say, "Oh, it's a stupid new guy." But if it got a big laugh, they'd go, "Hey, that was Fred's." And eventually, Logance assigned me a script, which was interesting because I wrote the episode where Ron Howard and Anson Williams guest starred on Laverne and Shirley.
First season, the first 13. So, Laverne and Shirley debuted as ABC's highest premiere ever, and debuted as #1, as did 3 years later, Mork and Mindy.
And then all three shows were like the top three, I think I read in your book.
Well, at one point, Gary Marshall produced 4 of the 5 top shows in America, including Angie, which, it isn't usually mentioned in the same breath with Happy Days and Mork and Levert.
Had a great theme song.
Not bad, not bad. But it was an amazing place to work. The greatest thing about Paramount was once in a while miracles literally happened. And one of them was Gary Marshall's 7 or 8-year-old son, Scott, now a director, said, "Dad, this is in the Star Wars summer, put a spaceman on Happy Days. He's trying to make his kid happy." So he comes to the writers, and we literally nearly drew straws before poor Joe Glauberg said, What did he say? Shit,
He said, gee, I'll write it, but it's going to be very painful.
and it was the most painful thing. What is this? What are we doing? What are we doing here? And then the guy they cast quit after the reading. And they tried all these other people. Nobody wanted it. And so Ronnie Hallen and Gary Mentier and Bobby Hoffman, who had moved into the casting director role, they're calling every agent in town. And finally, this guy, Alan Eisman, said he represented a young comic who did a Martian in his act. Send him over. And Robin came in, Robin Williams, who'd done some things, but never really had the spotlight. And Jerry Paris was so impressed when Ronnie brought him in to read again that he just grabbed him by the shirt and dragged him to the stage before they even had a contract. And a miracle happened, seriously, that this guy found this opportunity to show off the range of his talents. And the Happy Days cast, most shows would have thrown them off the set. Hell, Taxi threw Andy Kaufman out the door once. When he was doing, what's his name?
Tony Clifton.
The Happy Days cast were so gracious that they gave him the spotlight and let him rant. And in turn, it upped their game to compete at the same level with him. And those kind of things, once again, Jerry Paris could come to life and make every moment click and bring everything to a boil. And we came down for a run through. How many hours? 3 hours later, and what we saw, it was just.
No, it was, as Brian said, one of the most amazing things was usually if a guest star even changed a line, you go, what is this person doing? But Robin being Robin, and as Brian said, just we were incredulous. We'd never seen anything like that.
You walked out of there, your side hurt from laughing so much. You'd seen something new and awesome, and everybody walked out saying spinoff. And so what Gary Marshall did was take clips from the episode and did a split screen with a pilot that Happy Days producers Bob Brunner and Arthur Silver had done, Sister Terry, where young Pam Dauber, who was part of the ABC talent pool, was a plainclothes nun. And so they did this split screen. What happens when this wacky outer space guy meets this down-to-earth girl, Mork and Mindy? And they bought it. And then Pam Dauber discovered that the show existed in Variety. They'd never met till they flew him to Boulder to shoot the main title.
The book also mentions several spin-offs that never saw the light of day. I know there was Pinky Tuscadero and Lenny and Squiggy in the Army. Could we ever see any of those surface?
Would you want to? They're deep in somebody's vault. See, there's another book, Failed Pilots. Yeah. But Arthur Silver recounted the experience of the Pinky pilot, and he said we're kept rewriting things we hated.
Oh no!
And the network saying things like, "Has Gary seen this?" Actually, if you look, we cover in the book one of the hundreds and hundreds of images we have is the cover of the Pinky Tuscadero's pilot script. And it says on the bottom, just so everyone, supervised by Gary Marshall.
Stay tuned for more Happy Days.
There came a point, really, where the cast was that the 6th season or the 7th season that the first week back, they did a show promoting Jimmy Brogan's new show. What was the name of that one, Fred? Out of the Blue. Out of the Blue. And then the next week was another pilot Gary wanted to do with this woman, Deborah Pratt, is the mysterious warrior Kathmandu. And the cast put their foot down.
Yeah, it was Catman Don't.
But they did make that pilot, and it failed, thankfully. Uh, but I have never seen the Lenny and Squiggy pilot that they wrote and made with Harry Shearer, their David Lander and Michael McKeon's partner in the credibility cap. I understand it was very funny, but ABC went from wanting them off the show when they first met them. Gary kind of sneaked them in as writers, and then eventually they realized, wait a second, they're actors, they're not writers, and they went from wanting them off the show to doing the pilot, and then fearing that it would hurt the chemistry with the audience by breaking up Laverne and Shirley. And the same thing happened in the 6th season of Happy Days. You wrote a backup script for the Ralph and Patsy show.
Yes.
Yes, I think the premise was they moved to California. I wrote one where they survived their first earthquake.
Oh, sounds familiar. Sounds like a Laverne and Shirley episode.
Yeah, well,
When they moved to
Laverne and
Burbank.
Shirley. Well, Laverne and Shirley. What was it? 5th, 6th season. They moved the show to California, and not only that, they advanced it like 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, the girls opposed that move.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the audience did. I enjoy it because I actually live in Burbank.
Oh, very good.
But so speaking of what happens when, people go off to spinoffs, the two of you came back to Happy Days as supervising producers for season 10. Was it a good challenge with so many original characters no longer present?
Well, Aaron and Scott did 6 episodes for the 10th season, and I had been Fred had been there continually since the 4th season, the most stable anchor up in K building that you can possibly have.
Very lucky.
And I had left 2/3 of the way through the 6th season, that a pilot that I had written with Ron Levitt somehow not only sold but debuted after the Super Bowl, and then proved to be, coming from Happy Days, the most beautiful organization on earth, the most gifted, talented, loving cast who are my friends and family. And you went to a set where it was just chaos, and it didn't work, and I hated it. It was like my own personal Vietnam. You couldn't get out, and you didn't want to be there. But then from there, went to the Bad News Bears and did like 20 of those with Jack Warden and young Corey Feldman, and loved it. And it really, because it was a single camera show, it really benefited me in my desire to do more as a director and a filmmaker. And then I went to Mork for 2 years, which was, again, it was a show that lived and died on Robin's back.
Right. But also Brian was a showrunner too.
Yeah, well, which means I was the guy that the network was throwing darts at every week. And there was it was, Happy Days was so different from any other show where it was a machine, a well-oiled one. And even when things like, let's change to a 3-camera show, benefited them. Ron Howard, the star of the show, when his contract was up, he wanted to be a filmmaker since he was 13. His role had lessened on the show, and he'd already directed Skyward, that Anson Williams produced with Betty Davis, that really showed he was a very capable filmmaker. And he left the show. He took a 4-year deal at NBC from Fred Silverman, producer on ABC, and the show, some on the show said we should close the doors. According to Lowell Gans, the supervising producer at the time, he and Gary Marshall never discussed pulling the plug. They just, again, rejiggered the show and centered it more on Fonzie and Joni and Chachi's burgeoning romance.
And it gave an opportunity to introduce characters like Jenny Piccolo, for example, and
right with Kathy. Yes, Jenny Piccolo is an off-camera
Yeah.
character, and it was what year is that? She came on in the eighth year. Yes, yes, yes. After Ron, along with Ted McGinley, and it was a very successful integration. Ted is terribly had virtually no training, and he said in the book, it's like I'm watching Happy Days at home one week, and the next week I'm on the show with no training.
Incredible.
But he was a fast learner
Yeah,
and a
very
charming guy and fit right in. And he said we had wonderful interviews with Ted, and he said everything he did there was a lesson for him, and he said so many lessons, and that came from the environment that people shared. People helped each other. It was such an unusual and gifted group.
Yeah.
And we can't forget, that the show was beloved not just by kids and teenagers and adults. And Fred's good friend Lee Margulies, who was the TV critic for the LA Times for a long time, wrote a blurb, which unfortunately the publishers decided not to do on the back cover. Instead, they put the, what do you call it? The thing you scan.
Yeah, the scan bar.
Yeah. But he said, at the time, it was desirable to have a four-quadrant audience. This is, Happy Days had, at its peak, fourth season, had 30 million people watching every week. I think today, a top comedy like Young Sheldon maybe gets 2 million tops. Yeah. The audience has been terribly fragmented. But remember, this was the days before Nickelodeon, before the Disney Channel, before they decided to that cable really targeted different segments of the audience rather than doing things that had a wider net, which is a shame because it really was families gathered to watch Happy Days.
I know. Sorry.
Go on, please. I'd love to hear.
I personally fell in love with the show when TBS was airing reruns every afternoon in the 90s.
Yes, no, and like my kids watched it on Nick at Night.
Oh, wow.
It's still amazing how many young people know the show.
Did it surprise you that the show would still be loved and discussed 50 years on?
No. I mean, there was a time when Henry and Ron and Anson, they were not only just on the cover of every magazine, and let's face it, the fact that it spun off 2 #1 series embellished its reputation and its strength. Mary Tyler Moore had successful spinoffs. All in the Family had successful spinoffs. They didn't have sensations. These were sensations that Robin Williams was suddenly on the cover of every magazine, that his look was being copied on talking dolls, action figures, plush, suspenders, games, and endless amount of merchandising. Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days too. I mean, Happy Days, what did Giuseppe say? 2,000 licensed products, and I think he has them all.
You were talking about just how great the cast was working with each other. Do you think that's what contributed to so many of them becoming successful directors?
I think that working with Jerry Paris helped you to become a great director. That I don't think Jerry was the best with cameras that ever lived, but he brought performances to a boil. He got everything out of every line, every gesture, every movement.
That you could. As you saw in the interviews, the cast just loved Jerry.
Yeah, but you learned. I learned from him, and Ron learned from him, and Gary learned from him, and Rich Carell, who did 700 episodes of TV, learned from him, and Donnie Anson directed over 150 episodes of the Hercules, Xena, CW family stuff. Scott Baio, I did a couple Charles in Charges with him, and I really like Scott and respect him as a performer. And And to prepare for that, I went to some of their run-throughs and stuff. And when Scott was directing, Scott directed 36 of the like 120 episodes that they did, and his command was exemplary, and it was honest to God like watching Jerry Paris on stage, and you know everybody kind of talks the same way and adopted his ability to like to squeeze comedy like out of a toothpaste.
Mhm.
You know, and I think we all learned that, and you know, and the cast always said, you know, that we were taught by Gary and Jerry to pass on what we know everywhere we go, and that's why, you know, Fred can tell you. I mean, you know, Miller, Milkus, Boyette, the other producers of the show, I think did somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 episodes after Happy Days. What were some of theirs, Fred?
Well, Family Matters ran for nine, I think nine.
Full House. Rich Burrell directed some of those.
Which was created by Jeff Franklin, who started on Laverne and Shirley.
Yeah, step by step.
The Hogan family, the Family Man. Jesus, there was Lorimar was, you know, like Happy Days West.
Right.
But Bickley and Warren and Fred and Dave Duclon.
Punky Brewster.
Absolutely.
Dave
Absolutely.
Duclon.
Yeah, no, Duclon was a Happy Days guy.
Oh wow, that's such a great like group of alumni.
Well, remember Rob Reiner wrote
the pilot.
Or the pilot, right?
See, so Gary knew that the kids of people he worked with at one time would be talented writers.
Yeah, he started so many careers.
Well, as Lowell Gans said in the book, not just careers but lives.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, Lowell and I, you know, Gary had two had three kids, so we had three kids. We went to the school they went to.
Yeah. So there was something I've wondered that I'm not sure if it's in the book or not, or maybe it was cut. Were you guys ever tempted to bring back Chuck?
Never.
No, never entered our mind. We felt badly for the Chucks. So.
Let's face it. Chuck was an unsuccessful character who wasn't needed once Fonzie put on the leather jacket and became his older brother, in essence. Right. The guy didn't live in the house. So what was his involvement in the show? And it wasn't a well-developed character. And Tom and Marion are still furious that they just eliminated one of their kids.
And then in the finale, they're like, both of our children are married now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. On that note, how did it make you guys feel that there was a clip from that finale in the first episode of Friends?
I'm not aware of that, and I'm a big Friends watcher, and I don't remember the pilot. I mean, I loved the pilot was amazing.
No, in the pilot, Rachel is watching the Joni and Chachi wedding.
Ah,
wow!
And getting teary-eyed.
God,
that's great. Well, it was a teary occasion, I have to tell you. From Ron Howard came back in the 11th season. You asked, what was it? And yes, we were new characters and we embraced it. We tried to usher Fonzie into a mature romantic relationship with Ashley Pfister, the outcast, a single woman raising a daughter. Mm-hmm. And, we did our best to innovate the stories and not trip over what had been done previously. And so in the middle of towards the end of the 11th and final season, Ron Howard came back and Fred and I wrote a 2-part episode called Welcome Home that was seriously some of the finest work the cast has done. It was hugely emotional. It was energizing. It was a delight. When Ron and Donnie and Linda Goodfriend walked through that door, the audience went crazy. Mary and Tom are crying real tears. Then when Joni moved out at the top of season 10 for good, we thought. I mean, they constantly had to have their makeup touched up because it was so real to them that they were losing their daughter. And Happy Days could pack this emotional punch. And Welcome Home certainly felt like a conclusion of the series, and we still had 5 episodes to go. So it was tough, but then we rallied. Fred and I wrote the finale, and along with Bill Bickley, who was the original producer, and his writing partner Michael Warren. We wanted them to be part of it, and it was hard.
Yeah,
It
I
was
guess
hard to say,
at the end when the song "Memories" plays, it gets me every time. It was
over a collage of warm moments from the 11 years of the series. The seasons 7 through 11 are not available on video, and that's a real shame. And I do have some bad copies, taken from my VHS recordings, and we watch it, and I had forgotten how we rejiggered the main title.
Yes, I was gonna ask you about that.
For those late seasons where you saw the character Aaron Scott is 13, 14 years old, and all of a sudden here they are at 22, and you realize the length of people's involvement with the characters, and they were friends who came into your living room every week and have still been around all these years later.
Another thing I appreciated about the book is that you addressed the absence of Anson Williams in the finale. Because I'm sure anybody who was watching that night,
right,
he was wondering, where's Potsy? Because he was like a series regular for 11 years.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't believe he had a contract the last year. He only did 4 episodes the last year.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
He's cognizant of it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I remember an episode with him working at Cunningham Hardware and doing something.
So that was another thing that we introduced in season 9. That we recognized that Anson had lost his comedy partner, his best friend.
Yeah.
and so we did that to find a new relationship within the show, and I loved the way we did it with
the softball game.
The Braves. He replaced Richie as Howard's seatmate at the Braves games, and they built a new relationship, and that was great. And we did miss Ron and Don, Linda. But what do we always say, Fred? That the last season of Happy Days was going to be like Let It Be was for the Beatles. All right. A lot of the replacement parts are going away. And Scott and Aaron came back, and we moved the Fonzie and Roger to George S. Patton High School from Jefferson, a very tough place that generated stories for us, for all the characters.
Speaking of revamping certain things, was it hard for the cast to get used to a new Arnold's set?
Oh man, yeah, that was. Yeah,
we did great.
Yeah, when Arnold's burned down, we didn't let the cast see the results. So when they walked in, we wanted to see their real reactions, and it definitely worked.
Yeah.
I think this is my last question, unless you have more things you want to say, which I will welcome.
All right. Watch, here it is, Fred. Jump the shark.
We're not going to jump the shark. No.
Why?
Why? Because you can read about it in the book.
That's true.
People should buy it in November.
Very good.
What? Okay, this is kind of a two-parter then. What do you hope fans get out of reading this book? And again, when is the release date, and where can people buy it?
Fred, you want to talk about the...
Well, the release date is November 5th, and you can pre-order it.
Wherever books are sold.
Wherever books are sold.
Although somebody, oh, it was you, Fred, who said the thriftbooks.com has a much better deal than everybody else. Uh, and what was the first part of the question again?
What do you hope fans
That's what you
get
get
out
for
of
a
reading this
two-hander with
book?
old guys. You forget.
Oh,
All right.
yeah, what do we get out of, what do we want people to get out of the book? Was that the question?
Yes.
I think that a different perspective on the show, an insider's perspective, and to hear the cast discuss the events that made the show what it is today and contributed to its enormous success. And it really is about this group of people who, and the TV is a tough business, you know, and 75% of pilots never make it to the air. 10% of those ever see a second season.
Right.
And for a show to become a show that almost failed, that was down to like number 58 in the ratings in its second season, to turn around, revamp itself, and become not only the top show in television, but an engine that drove a network and a studio to unparalleled success. Happy Days was just not a hit in the United States.
Right.
It was massive in the English-speaking world, in England and Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, all over
Yeah,
the world.
Italy, for
In
sure.
Italy, yeah, no. In Italy, yeah, you got a 10-year-old boy who gets a Fonzie doll and ends up with his arm around Henry at the Bronze the Fonz ceremony.
Well, and also you're going to be at the Hollywood Collectors Show in a couple weeks, right?
Yes, we
Right.
are. It'll be the first time the book will be available for sale, and we'll be there signing and other Happy Days memorabilia for people who don't want to shell out all that money. But yeah, it's worth it. And
It's the 18th.
we spent 2 years putting this together, and it is a labor of love, and we're so proud of it. And we thank you for your time, and we hope everyone checks out the book. And I don't think that if you're a TV fan or just interested in a great story and amazing people, pick it up.